Today, we become legends.
This time on Titan Talk, they went over the full OB17 balance patch notes with a ton of changes to cover, as well as some questions about the game's full release, SPL, and player count metrics. So without further ado, let's jump into the recap. So first up, let's jump in with the OB17 balance, where Pon said the general goals for this patch's balance changes were to address some remaining outliers from the big healing pass, as well as mid lane intelligence builds specifically, as they felt very one note and a lot of the same essential items make up every build in mid, so they're buffing some of the lesser used options for intelligence builds to try and promote some build diversity and competition, with some of the top items like Pendant, Desolation, Rod to Hootie, that kind of stuff. And as far as gods, they were mostly just looking at general nerfs to gods that have been performing well for a long time, and buffs to ones that have been underperforming for a long time. So with that preamble out of the way, let's jump into the individual changes. First up is Agni, who's getting a 5% scaling nerf to his ultimate, and for the aspect specifically, he's getting a nerf to the Ignite scaling and the Consume Ignite scaling. Athena is getting a buff to her taunt duration protection scaling threshold. You now need 115 item protections to extend the duration by 0.2 seconds compared to 150 before. Shark is getting a nerf with his axe cooldown now being 10 seconds flat at all ranks rather than 10 seconds scaling down to 8, and the base damage on his 2 has been nerfed at all ranks as well. Cupid is getting a bug fix that's also a buff. He will now properly restore mana when picking up hearts from his 2 and properly restore health when allies pick up hearts from his 2. Hades is getting a similar change to Athena, with the item protections required to extend the duration of his 2 being lowered from 125 to 100. Huyi is getting some nerfs with his health threshold to trigger Sun Touched on his passive going from 20% to 25. Ricochet loses 10 base damage at all ranks, and his jump now scales down from 17 seconds to 15 based on rank rather than 15 seconds flat. Kali is also getting some nerfs with her health per level and base attack speed coming down a little bit. Neith is getting some shifts to her passive, with the strength scaling components generally getting buffs, but the int scaling components getting nerfs, as well as the int scaling on her 2 going down from 90% to 80%. Uller is getting a bug fix, but also a nerf. He was unintentionally getting the strength and lifesteal from his ultimate's passive while in axe stance, which he will no longer get. Vulcan is getting a shift with the alternator mod, getting a pretty big buff going from 12 second cooldown to 6 second on the turret, but the thermal mod is losing 10% scaling on backfire and magma bombs. Similarly, his ultimate is also being shifted, with it losing some base damage and scaling but gaining a larger distance multiplier. That's it for god balance though. Let's move into the items. Ancient Signet is getting 5 more intelligence and 50 more mana. Book of Thoth is getting 1% more mana conversion to intelligence. Divine Ruin is getting 10% more scaling and a 5-second reduced cooldown on the passive trigger. Gem of Focus is going from 10 cooldown rate to 20. Tekko Kagi is going from 50 strength to 60. Regrowth Striders is getting a nerf to its movement speed on the passive. Currently it's 30% decaying to 10%. It will now be 25% decaying to 0%. Runeforged Hammer is getting some buffs with 5 more strength, 15% more item protection scaling on the passive trigger, as well as the cooldown going from 40 seconds to 30 seconds, and the cooldown refund on hard CCing a god going from 3 seconds to 6. Soul Gem is getting a slightly more involved shift in this patch. It will now trigger on hitting allies with abilities where possible. This is Smite 1 parity, so stuff like healing allies or using a Janus 3 on allies will now give a stack, but still once per ability use. To compensate for this though, they are shifting the heal so that it provides to be a bit stronger in the early levels but weaker at later levels, as well as giving the item 20 more base intelligence. Daybreak Gavel is getting a minor rework in this patch. Instead of consuming the stacks to grant increased scaling to your next ability, it now simply grants flat strength or intelligence per stack for 8 seconds when you use your non-healing ability. Moving on though, Staff of Mirrodin's active effect cooldown is going down from 120 seconds to 80. Totem of Death is getting 15 more intelligence. Typhon's Heart is getting some bigger changes. The damage scaling on its attacks and base health of the summon have both been increased. The item gets 10 more base intelligence, and they're making some changes to the summon's behavior to make it more usable. It will now retreat to you if you get separated by more than 13.2 meters, which is 1.5 ranged basic attacks away for reference. It will also now only consider targets that are in combat for its attacks, so it won't just run into towers and die. Moving on though, Umbral Link is getting a 200 gold cost reduction in this patch, and finally for items, Triton's Conch is getting 5 more base strength and 3 more strength on the aura, as well as a 100 gold cost reduction. There's also a few small conquest changes coming in this patch as well. The gold pots near Gold Fury can now be broken by melee basic attacks. This isn't relevant for most gods, but might be relevant for gods like Yhorm or Mercury. Jungle monsters now use their signature attacks earlier in their attack chain. Previously, they would use them pretty late in the chain and often die before using them outside of the early game. Wind Sprites can be used by Yhorm and will grant him a movement speed buff for 2 seconds. Oracles and the mid lane rotating buff camp now spawn at 1 minute 30 instead of 1 minute, so they now spawn wave 3 instead of wave 2 when the jungler would normally show up on mid on the current patch. This could definitely shift stats around quite a bit, as there's no real need for for the jungler to be in mid at wave 2 anymore, and you're probably better off going to take more camps or going for a gank or something. Purple and blue buff have had their spawn timers pushed up from 25 seconds to 20. This is intended to make it so you don't miss any minions from wave 1 after duo clearing these camps. They have also dramatically reduced the health and protections of blue buff, but also its gold and XP reward accordingly. The aim here is that it should now be soloable by the solo laner, meaning the jungler doesn't need to start blue with their solo. The reduced XP and gold should be roughly equivalent to what you currently get by splitting the camp with the jungler. So the idea is that the solo laner can now start their blue, solo it, get to lane in time to not miss any minions from wave 1, and then hit level 2 without the need for the jungler to start at blue. That's it for the balance changes coming in OB17 though. Definitely a lot of big changes here, and for sure some meta shifts will emerge from this, but let's move into the Q&A section of today's show. First up, some people were asking about ranked Joust in chat again, and Kilgun reiterated that the mode was very unpopular in Smite 1 and they don't want to split the player base of Joust in Smite 2 by adding it. They didn't say this, but I will add that the current player base of Smite 2 probably means that a ranked mode as unpopular as ranked Joust would have insanely long queue times or terrible matchmaking, or both. They have talked previously about some potential middle ground solutions of adding leaderboards to the mode and having bans turn on at a certain MMR threshold so that it's kind of effectively a ranked mode within the same queue, but that was just an idea they floated and not something they're necessarily doing. Someone asked if there's been any improvement in player count from their metrics, and Kilgun said yes, they've been slowly trending up in the amount of people playing, how long they play, and their new player retention over the last few months or so. Later in the show, someone asked how quick play Joust specifically has been doing in comparison to Arena, and Pon said it's been surprisingly good. They expected maybe a lower initial retention rate but higher in the long run, but it just seems to be higher in general. Kilgun added that on the whole, they've just been hitting higher and higher new player retention rates basically every day, which is good to hear. Someone asked for new name colors when, and Kilgun said they think there might be some coming in the next update, but they don't want to just flood them into the game as they are expensive and might be less special if they have a new pack to buy in every single update. Someone asked about adding Frostbound Hammer, and Pon said they're not opposed to it, but they probably want to find a good balance point for Gem of Isolation first before adding Frostbound Hammer to make sure it's not too oppressive. Some people in chat were mentioning their displeasure about the anti-heal removal, and Pon said that no balance change is ever going to please every player, but generally they feel like more people have liked the change than haven't. But if you feel like it was a bad change, let him know specifically what feels bad about it. Is it a certain god or a certain item or the entire system? That kind of feedback is more useful to them than just update is bad, fix it. Tablet of Destinies was brought up, and Pon said they can definitely look at it. They do want to balance bringing over the best of Smite 1 while also bringing in new things that we haven't seen before. They also consider taking a concept from Smite 1 and doing a different take on it rather than porting the exact item. Like for example, Equinox might not get ported directly, but playing with the different effect when you hit from behind or in front kind of idea could make for an interesting new item. Someone asked if they have any plans to replace the gold pile in mid, and Pon said that will probably be one of the first things that goes when they have an idea of what to replace it with. Kilgun asked chat if it's the act of picking it up or the reward that people find boring, and chat said generally both, which I agree with. And finally, there was a question on when the game will be fully released and out of beta, and Kilgun said there's no definite date on that. Basically, when they feel the game is ready to be not called a beta anymore and has a baseline that they're happy with calling a full release. Some people followed up in chat by asking about SPL, and Hindu Man said that they're not really even thinking about that too much while they're in the beta phase, and that's something that would only be considered once the game is fully out and ready, much like how Smite 1 handled things. But that's everything discussed on the show. Don't forget to drop a like before you leave, and I'll catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.